Sec. Okay, I see it. Double digits. Okay, I think it's probably about time to get started. We've both posted it and all that various stuff. Okay, and we're now visible to the world. Let me rearrange some things on my desktop. Okay, I think we're good to go now. It's Friday, November 28th, 2025. This is BitDevs Radio Hour number 2. I'm Stephen DeLorme.
I'm Alex Lewin. Happy Black Friday, Stephen.
Happy Black Friday, Alex. How was your Thanksgiving?
Spectacular. Good to see the family. Good to argue about politics.
Did you give a lot of thanks?
Yeah, I'm thankful.
How many thanks did you give?
Several.
I think that 0 fucks given and infinite thanks given is the path to enlightenment.
Yeah, I'm basically a monk in the Himalayas.
Yeah, nice. It's getting fucking cold today.
Yeah, it's like...
Oh, wait, are we allowed to curse on this show?
I mean, I guess it's your call.
I thought it was your call. I don't know.
I think it's a family show, so we should try to keep it down, maybe.
Yeah, okay. Bad Steven.
Yeah.
Well, we're here to talk about some more technical updates in Bitcoin and all of that kind of stuff. We're going to, at the end, go over zaps and comments we've gotten from people and all of that. So if you zapped us, stay tuned so you can hear it at the end. But otherwise, I guess we can dive into the topic at hand today.
Cool. Let's do it. Yeah, and also for the audience, if you have any questions, feel free to comment on Twitter. Send us zaps live. We'll see those on stream so we can answer your questions as you provide them.
All right, now I'm going to try and get a little screen share for those that are watching the video here. For those of you just listening later on the podcast, we'll narrate what's going on. So some of the big news this week, I've got on screen here a tweet from Instagibbs. The mempool is dead. Long live the mempool. What could he possibly mean by that? Well, he's got a link here to a Bitcoin Core PR 33629 cluster mempool. And if we go into there, we can see that it has been merged recently, 3 days ago. So I suspect that means it will be in the next major Bitcoin Core release. It's there on the master branch right now if you want to build it yourself and mess with it. But Yeah, cluster mempool. That's a pretty obviously he's trying to generate a little bit of add a little bit of spice there by saying the mempool's dead.
Yeah, I mean, from an onlooker, like it's honestly hard to believe it's finally happening. People have been talking about cluster mempool for literally years, and it's actually going to be included in the next release of Bitcoin.
Yeah, I remember when we first talked about it at an Atlanta BitDevs meetup, probably in 2023. I think that's when SIPA and SDEF2R first wrote the proposal for it. To be actually honest, I'm not sure how to pronounce this person's screen name or if they go by another name. So if you know Alex, please correct me.
Yeah, I think it's pronounced Daft Punk.
Daft Punk.
Yeah.
We'll just call them Daft Punk for the rest of the episode. Yeah. And actually, if somebody, I think there's actually like a way that we can like pull up comments. If people comment on like YouTube and Twitter, we'll see it. So maybe someone will like shout out and tell me what an idiot I am. But yeah, so we've got the pull request right up on screen here. We also have a delving post that we can look at that's also from Daft2R about the proposal and what it means. I think we should probably, instead of like looking at this stuff line for line, just kind of approach this from the what does it do for the world. So yeah, I'm prepared to tell that story. But any comments you want to make before we dive into story time?
Yeah, maybe like first, what are we talking about? So this is cluster mempool. First, what's the mempool?
Perfect place to start. Yeah, I mean, if you're not familiar with the mempool, that's the memory pool. It's the basic idea. I like to think of it as just a queue of transactions waiting to get in line, waiting to get confirmed into the next block. So waiting in line is one way to think about it. They're unconfirmed transactions, right? But if we think about it as just a queue, like a line, that wouldn't be totally accurate, because in practice, it's a little bit chaotic, I think, because my wallet makes a Bitcoin transaction, signs it, broadcasts it to the rest of the Bitcoin network. And what I hope is that it gets picked up by a node. That node then propagates it to another Bitcoin node. And, in a matter of seconds, it's propagated through the entire Bitcoin network. But, in practice, this doesn't always, work. Some, nodes might have different mempool policies than other nodes. There may be various other reasons, why it has difficulty traversing the network. So in practice, not everybody's mempool is going to be the same as everyone else's mempool. But the idea is, in a like kind of perfect, beautiful, theoretical world, every Bitcoin node has a mempool, and it's like roughly like what everybody else's mempool is. It's just this cluster of, if I want to make blocks as a miner, these are the transactions I can pull from and put into blocks.
Yep. Yeah, so everybody has a mempool. If you want to get a transaction included in a block, you dump your transaction in the mempool in hopes that the miner will eventually snatch that up and put it into a block. But maybe what are some of the problems, the historic problems of the mempool? Is the mempool a beautiful place that's super organized in the past, or is it?
Oh no, it's a dangerous place, actually. I think actually some of the dangerous things might be worth getting into later, but like just to focus on like the problems at hand, like kind of like what's wrong with the old mempool. I guess you'd say it's the existing mempool because it's the one most nodes use, but as soon as everybody updates, it'll be the old mempool. So what's wrong with the old mempool? The old mempool, like we have to think about like who's going to be using the mempool, right? And like why we need to think about like transactions in the mempool. So like one like kind of user of the mempool is miners. So if I want to get a block template, then I need to know what transactions are in the mempool. And as a miner, I'm incentivized to mine the block that's going to get me the most fee revenue, right? So I want to my understanding of it is that basically when the algorithm that helps like Bitcoin Core get a block template is basically looking at a transaction and it's looking at its ancestors. So basically like I have a transaction, does it spend an output created by another transaction that's also in the mempool? And it's looking at the fee rate of the transaction and its like ancestors. Whereas when we're talking about the other user of the mempool, which would be eviction, eviction, scary sounding word, just kind of, it's just the technical word for it. Your mempool can't be like infinite in size, right? So like I think the default is 300 megabytes for Bitcoin Core. You want, at a certain point, your mempool is going to fill up with too many transactions, and you have to start evicting transactions. Well, what transactions do we want to evict from the mempool? Well, if we have to evict transactions, I don't think we want to evict any of them, but if we have to evict transactions, we want to evict the transactions that are less likely to make it into the next block or the block after that or the block after that. And so when eviction occurs, the Bitcoin Core is basically going the other way. It's like, well, take this transaction and all of its descendants, and what's the fee rate of all of this combined? And you would think, like, what would be the problem of this? Because if a miner is looking at the problem from one direction, like what has the most fees, and if the eviction algorithm is looking at it from the other direction, what has the least amount of fees, you would think that it would just be perfectly opposite and symmetrical. Like whatever the mining one says would be the opposite of what the eviction one says.
Yeah, like maybe as an illustrative analogy, like you could think of a bunch of people waiting in line to get on a ride or something, and you'd expect that, if the line gets too long, you have to kick off the people at the back of the line. And you'd expect the people at the back of the line not to overlap with the people that are about to get on the ride. But that's not the case of how Bitcoin works today, is it?
No, it's not. And transactions are more complicated than that. It turns out that you will not get the exact same results. And so it means what the problem that this introduces is, if a mempool, a Bitcoin mempool is trying to evict lesser fee paying transactions from its mempool, it's going to give you a different result than what the mining algorithm would give you. And so that means that we're evicting stuff from the mempool that's not aligned with the natural incentives of miners.
Yeah, like we can accidentally evict stuff that we actually want to include in the next block.
Exactly. And this makes it this is problematic. I mean, I think for one, you want your you want your mempool to reflect, you want it to be an accurate reflection of good miner fee revenue. You also want to be able to accurately determine fee rates. I've heard that this really, really complicates RBF, just in terms of like trying to replace by fee. Say, I have a transaction, I want to get it mined sooner, so I want to up the fee. This process really complicates it. And it might be worth digging into, like, well, why is it that these two different algorithms aren't the polar opposite of each other? Like, why is it that one gives me one set of results and one gives me a different set of results?
Yeah, I mean, I've heard, so like all of these, we're talking about mempool policy rules and just like what you're supposed to do to update the mempool in certain situations. So like the big one, like we were talking about, is the get next block, or like create block template RPC. So for mining, there's the natural process of clearing out the call it waste or spam transactions that are too small to ever get into blocks. So that's evicting when the mempool gets too big. And then there's also crazy rules with RBF. So I've heard all of these rules should effectively be talking about the same thing, but how it's implemented today is that I've heard it described as spaghetti code. It's spaghetti rules with overlapping rule sets. There's no unification with all of these different actions, even though that they're all related. There's just heuristics. So as soon as you try to do anything complicated with the mempool, like RBFing complicated transactions, you start to have wonky behavior.
Yeah, I think there's another thing to explore here, which is when you have transactions, like if you were talking about the example of like people trying to get on a ride, and how it should be symmetrical and opposite. When we talk about Bitcoin transactions, it's far more complicated than that, because like a simple example might be like, okay, I have a Bitcoin wallet, I send a transaction that's an unconfirmed transaction. So it's just one output creates another output. But it could get more complicated. I could send you Bitcoin, broadcast that transaction, and you could try to spend that transaction before it's confirmed. So now we have a child transaction. Or maybe I want to get it to you sooner. So I want to fee bump it. So I do child pays for parent. So I broadcast, we try and broadcast another transaction that spends from that in order to get it fee bumped. But it doesn't, it gets more complicated. And this is where I think it becomes very, very difficult for the old mempool to kind of keep up is let's think about a Lightning channel. I want to open a Lightning channel. Well, I might be putting in multiple of my inputs, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to put multiple inputs in, and I'm going to put that into a 2 of 2 multisig, and then like later on, I want to close that channel, and that channel has one output going to me, one output going to my channel partner. It starts to get complicated, and both me or my channel partner could try to spend from those. Let's think about an even bigger thing. What about a coin join? We've all heard about these various privacy tools, and a lot of times, you might be talking about 100 different outputs. Well, what if participants in those coin joins try to spend those outputs before they're confirmed? Or what if you have a bunch of people withdrawing from Coinbase and it's all batched into one batch transaction? And again, people are trying to spend those outputs before they're confirmed. So you could have a transaction with like 100 different outputs, and each one of those outputs could have its own like child transaction.
Yeah, so just like the old rules, if you have big complicated transactions like this, you're just helpless. Like you have no idea what's going to happen to your massive chain transaction if there's a bunch of outputs and a bunch of people involved.
Yeah.
With these old rules.
Yeah, it's not as simple as just a bunch of people getting in line for a ride. That's why I very quickly disposed of the queue analogy at the beginning of the show.
Yeah, it's like, what if your queue is filled with people? Some of them are handcuffed to each other, and some of them there's like a weird like incestuous family relations with a really fucked up family tree. So there's some of them are somewhat related, and others are still related but less related. It gets very complicated quickly about how to kick the whole family out of line at once.
Oh yeah, that's got to be a difficult wedding to get invited to. Well, why don't we dig a little bit, and I'm going to see if I can scroll down into S. Stafter's post here and see if I can find just a fun graphic or visual to throw up on screen here. Actually, I should have already had some of this kind of stuff. We're kind of looking at some various examples here, and it's showing like transaction A, and it spins to transaction B and transaction C. There's all kinds of different paths you can take here. Let me just find. Yeah, this is a really crazy one right here. Anyways, I was going to get a little bit into the solution, but I think you're about to say something. Don't want to.
Yeah, I mean something I looked that I think is relevant. There was something talking about the idea of making RBF rules incentive compatible with miners. Like this is, I think, an important concept. Yeah, here we go. The first question is to ask what incentive compatible should mean. So in an ideal world, we want the policy rules set in Bitcoin Core to be aligned with miner incentives. We don't want miners to be incentivized to break policy rules. And this is something that like dictates a lot of the policy decisions. And I think some people have like really interesting ideas for mempool policy, but because they aren't incentive compatible with miners, like if there's a situation that a rule creates where the miner is incentivized to not follow the rule, then we can't have the rule. We want miners to always to always have the most profitable route be to follow the rules. Anyway, so this is a big motivation and like why this problem is very hard to solve.
Yeah. Why don't we get a little bit into the what does cluster mempool do that's different? So we said earlier that there's these kind of like two different algorithms. There's the one that the mining side of Bitcoin Core used. There's the one that the mempool eviction side used. Cluster mempool is this project. My understanding of it is it's trying to kind of unify that with just one algorithm, or trying to unify that with just like one methodology, so that the eviction side and the mining side give you the same thing. And so the way that it does this is it basically kind of reconceptualizes the mempool in terms of clusters. And I think you can think of we're looking at on screen right here. It's this diagram of transaction A spending to B and C. You can think of this as, being a cluster. These are a cluster of related transactions. These children here depend on this parent. Transaction D is over here. It's like a whole different thing. It's kind of like a cluster of its own. But so we stop thinking of transactions as like these individual things that we need to rank and sort, and we start thinking about these as clusters. And then there's this process called cluster linearization. And yeah, I mean, to be honest, this is the part where it gets a little bit theoretical and mathy and a little above my pay grade. But the basic idea is that, so like a cluster is a directed acyclic graph, right? So we're like this example we're looking at on screen here. It is acyclic, meaning that the arrows only flow in one direction. You can't find a path through this graph that gets you back to the beginning. And that makes sense because like how would like a transaction spend back to itself? Like it doesn't make sense. So you mathematically you represent like a cluster as this directed acyclic graph. And then there's a way that you can linearize that. And by linearizing it, it's like the way it's like you're basically putting them all in, you're taking all of the transactions that would go in that graph and you're putting them in an order. And so it's like parent, child, parent, child, parent, child. Obviously, you need a parent to be, included before a child. You can't have a child transaction be mined before the parent transaction that it spends from is mined. And so the purpose of this linearization process is to basically take this complicated cluster graph of transactions and organize it into a line, a queue, like we talked about at the beginning, and put it in a way to where you're making sure that the parents always come before the children, and you're then able to take, you can basically, once you've organized them by that, like parent, child, parent, child, parent, child, those become chunks. And the kind of magic that ends up happening is you can then rank all of those individual chunks according to the total amount of fee revenue as compared to virtual bytes. And from there, once you have all the chunks in order, you can then make an accurate, more accurate estimation of what should go into the next block, what shouldn't. And from there, if you do the mining side, what do I want in my block, or the mempool, what should I evict, they'll actually produce symmetrical results.
Cool. Yeah, I mean, in computer science, this is like close to some like a concept called topological sort. So like if you're sorting like items in a graph, oftentimes you care about like strict ordering. Like there's a strict ordering of the graph. So you never want a child to show up before the parent. So this is just a fancy like the linearization process or the normalization process where you flatten everything. That's like my understanding is it's just a fancy topological sort.
I see.
You get these nice fancy organized clusters that will always be in the right order for anybody using the mempool. Yeah, both the miners and the evictors.
Yeah. And that's what we want. We want this to all be, incentive compatible. And I did come up with some questions while I was like, I'm not sure if this might just be a question we need to answer on another day, but maybe you can help me with this. I was kind of curious, why was it necessary to just redo everything as clusters? Because it seems to me like the lowest hanging fruit would have just been like, okay, we have one way of sorting transactions for mining and getting block templates. We have another way of doing this for, we have another way of doing this for eviction. Why not just pick one of them? And like why not just like, for example, like do the mining one and just be like, okay, we're sorting everything in accordance with what's going to go into the next block, and anything that's beyond the size of my mempool, we're going to evict. Like, I wonder why it.
Yeah, like I think the intuition for this is that like if you treat each transaction as separate, then you will miss information when taking a greedy strategy. Mm-hmm. Like if you take a greedy strategy on ordering transactions without grouping them together when there are relations between them, then you will just flat out miss information. And like the base case of this is like it's like an analogy of tickets to buy to like a train ticket. So if you have a bunch of people with train tickets and there is a parent that has a very cheap ticket, but they're holding the hands of their child with a very expensive ticket, it doesn't make sense to evaluate just the parent without the child. So if you have a parent with a $1 ticket but a child with a $100 ticket, you might accidentally reject the parent before even realizing that the parent-child combo together is worth over $100. So yeah, the idea of clustering it together, like in the past, like we had a bunch of ad hoc ways to try to avoid this mistake, but there are different ad hoc ways. So the clusterization process, or the cluster map of the whole design is you first draw the clusters and then you do an algorithm on the clusters rather than the individual transactions.
I see.
So does that make sense?
I think so, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think another thing that I found interesting going through this was we're actually, I'm going to see if I can find an example here. CPFP. I'm searching through this page. Yeah, so the CPFP carve-out rule can no longer be supported. Well, that's a mouthful. So what does that mean?
So first, CPFP is child pays for parents. So this is the exact situation that I'm talking about, is where a child transaction has a higher fee than the parents, or the child fee, or that the child transaction effectively pays for the parent.
Yeah.
So yeah, this is a way of fee bumping.
Well, so the carve out rule. So this is like a whole other rabbit hole here with the carve out rule. So I was familiar with child pays for parent. I was wrapping my head around the carve out rule as I was reading this, and it's all very intertwined with pay to anchor and truck and V3 and all this kind of stuff. So let me. I thought this was an interesting, because I spend a lot of time focusing more on Lightning stuff. So this is very, very relevant for anyone who develops for Lightning. So have you heard of channel pinning attacks?
I have.
So a channel pinning attack, for anyone who hasn't heard, is this idea that, let's say Alex and I have a Lightning channel together, and we're going to close the Lightning channel, but what Alex, if he's malicious, he can do is he can basically do a child pays for parent transaction, and he can create another transaction that spends from our Lightning channel closed transaction, and then create a transaction that spends from that one, and then from that one, and then from that one, until he hits 25 transactions. And I actually realized my Mac is about to die. So 1 second.
I'll set it up.
Okay, 1 second. Should have paid attention to those details before we went streaming. So, and there's a power strip back there. So the idea is that, we want to have this ability to fee bump transactions by spending from an unconfirmed transaction, right? We can spend from a transaction that's unconfirmed in order to incentivize a miner to include it in the next block. The problem is that we don't want to allow that indefinitely.